GM friends, and welcome to the Metacast brought to you by Naavik. My name is Nico. Today I'm joined by my friends Philip Collins and Anton Backman, and in this episode we plan on having a discussions between the people that don't build, the investors, what we're looking for in Web3 games, and we're going to share our takes on where we think, or what teams we think will win, or what approaches we think will win. So it should be a very interesting discussion, and I've been looking forward to this one. First, let's do like very, very short intros. So Philip, can you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Philip Collins. I'm part of the investment team at Konvoy Ventures, which is a gaming dedicated VC fund based in Denver, Colorado. We actually particularly focus on platform infrastructure and tech in the gaming world, but have done a lot of work in Web3 and have had a little bit more of a content heavy focus, especially back in 2021. So excited to be talking to Nico and Anton about this.
And for those of you who don't know, me and Phil, we talk weekly on air during our FogDAO, the Future of Gaming weekly blockchain gaming roll-up. That rolls off the tongue. We need to find a new name for that, man. Anyway,
I'm shocked you're willing to have another conversation with me every week.
It rolls up off the tongue.
Oh, there we go. That is the perfect intro for our friend Anton, who has the driest humor of anyone I've ever met. But Anton, please feel free to tell us more about yourself than that.
Yes, aside from my dry humor, I'm a principal at Play Ventures. We're also an early stage gaming fund with a global focus, investing in both content and tech in the game industry. Now with a couple of funds up and running, including a crypto games fund called the Play Future Fund, which I run together with one of our partners, Kenrick. Very excited to be here. And also, I just gotta chime in as you guys mentioned the FogDAO that I have a pitch for you guys, an idea for Fog. It's and I'm happy to be included in that one as well. So the idea is the Fog of War podcast, and that is a podcast where the guests don't hear each other, but the host hears everyone, and then trying to have an async discussion. So if you need volunteers, then hit me up.
That's an experiment, and I feel like this is a terrible way of doing things, specifically for the host, because, I don't know. Maybe you can join and you can host, and I'll just be in the audience, just blindsided, just listening to you. Good, great intro. Also, did you mention that you're also like a podcaster extraordinaire, Anton?
Oh yeah, that's true. So I also co-host the Tokenomics podcast, a shameless plug here now, which is the crypto segment of Deconstructor Fun, a gaming podcast. I'm sure many listeners of this podcast also know. So tune in there to hear more when me and Ethan Levy deconstruct things that are happening in the crypto games world, and also some good puns, man. I feel they're good.
That's what all the guys who make terrible puns.
I'll leave you to decide.
Yeah. Good. Highly recommend. Good stuff there. All right. So while Phil was talking, I remembered something, and I'd love to have your take on this that I've been noticing in the space. So as some of you might know, so whenever a deal comes into Bitcraft and it's just a weird deal, they send it to me, I'm into like non-traditional kinds of deals. And so I'm speaking to a lot of builders, a lot of game developers who are looking to do weird stuff on chain, right? So a lot of games, most games actually, they have the game logic exist, on AWS servers, and then the assets live on the blockchain, and that is considered a Web3 game. And we can have a discussion about should that be called Web 2.5 game. But I'm looking at teams and games that have more of the logic happening on chain, and so what I've been seeing, and I'm actually kind of liking this, but I would love to have your take on as well, is a lot of these games, so they don't really know so they're actually looking to build tooling and infrastructure, but they don't really know what will be needed. And so what they do is they just build a game first, and then they see, we need this to build this game and to actually make this vision come true. And then, I guess that's the way they're starting thinking about this. Might that be, Phil, why you've invested heavily into content as well, or might that be a reason to start doing that more as well?
Yeah, it's interesting because I do think that in order to fix that chicken and the egg problem of the tooling that exists versus the games that can be built on it, we've started to see a lot of content teams go for the infrastructure angle as well. And I think a lot of the times we see other groups that are infrastructure focused trying to build the underlying tools that will eventually be available for licensing by game developers. And I think a lot of the times we view it as a little bit of a distraction for a lot of content teams, because just knowing what's coming down the pipeline in terms of the tools that will be available to them over the next 6, 12, 18 months, I think there will be a broader availability of the tools that you need to build fully on-chain or partially on-chain games. And I think generally from our perspective, and granted we are a more infrastructure-focused fund, we like to see the content teams focus on the content, just knowing what is going to be available to them soon.
To just drop in there, because so I'll try to avoid naming names and naming chains here, but one of the teams we've invested in is also building, really on the bleeding edge of on-chain out there. And so they chose a layer 2 solution they wanted to build on, but that layer 2 solution overpromised when the mainnet would go live. And so for that reason, so basically they were like, the game was kind of getting ready, but then the chain on which it should live was not ready. And so they had this counterparty risk, or this third-party risk that they had to manage. And so that's why I guess, that would be a counterpoint to what you just mentioned, right? If you assume that the tooling will be there, but you don't have any control over it, you're putting yourself kind of at risk.
For sure. And I think it's also evolved too. Like we're early investors in Sky Mavis. And of course they've built Ronin and they've built Axie Infinity to date. I think in the past it's made more sense where the velocity of infrastructure being developed was not happening at the same rate as it is today. And so businesses that have been building over the last 3-4 years, it does make sense that they've had to create their own tools. I just think that mindset is shifting a little bit as the space continues to evolve and as more infrastructure continues to come to market. I think it'll become less of a necessity, whereas Sky Mavis viewed Ronin as more of a necessity for them to achieve their goals. I think moving forward, there will be more third-party availability for those developers. So it's an evolution from necessity to ease of use from third-party functionality.
Mm-hmm.
Just dropping in there, I think this is a very interesting discussion in terms of kind of the whole chicken and egg problem between content and infrastructure. Maybe I think the common consensus I usually see is that, you want to have the infrastructure companies building out the infrastructure, then the content will sort of come and the content will follow. But I don't necessarily agree, or at least 100% with that. I think there's a bit more nuance to it. Plus, it's also, it supports the narrative also of VC in general, because most VCs prefer to invest in infrastructure than going directly into content investing. Now, obviously, we are all here in a lucky position that we're industry focused and we can take more of a portfolio approach to everything that's happening in the industry. But if a generalist VC invests in gaming, it's usually in infrastructure because they have a hard time warranting 2 or 3 studio investments per fund vintage. But going back to that discussion on kind of how does content come first or infrastructure, there I think, and again, I'm not saying that history repeats itself, but it often rhymes. I think it applies to this as well, where if we look at some of the bigger gaming infrastructure companies, many of them started also or tech infrastructure. They usually start as studios from the get-go and building infrastructure, solving for their own problems. Not necessarily they didn't become big game studios, but they became big tech companies. So obviously looking at Discord, which was a MOBA studio in the beginning, looking at Slack, who were trying to build an MMO, looking at even Unity started out as a content developer, and they eventually spun out Unity Studios to a separate entity, which didn't become obviously nearly as big as the game engine company. And also, if we look at Unreal Engine, it's mostly a result of them building their own solutions for their own games. Obviously, there's a lot of merit, I think, to Philip's comment about what the cadence of new technology is right now, given that small teams, they can plug in every SaaS product there is, and then they can spin up new tech with smaller teams all the time. And so you just generally have a much bigger abundance of tech. Where I maybe where my concerns lie there is that I'm not always sure if these gaming technology developers really understand the needs of the content developers, and it potentially also, if you rely too much on that gaming infrastructure, which mainly tries to emulate status quo and what's now possible in the market and trying to do incremental improvements, does that stifle the innovation also of the content developers? So even if we see more and more APIs being plugged into, more and more SDKs also being used, and obviously of the distribution platforms as well, I think we still see a number of custom tooling that is being built by these content teams. But let's say they don't need to go through all of that rudimentary tech anymore. But I think all of this actually also amplifies their ability to focus on that specific tooling they need to really figure out new things. And when they figure out, when that handful of studios that are out there in each kind of cycle, if you will, figure out new things to do with games, figure out completely new types of games. That's when I believe the infrastructure developers look at, okay, what are these guys doing? And let's sort of now there's been a tech leap, but then they kind of globalize or democratize that tech in a way for all the other developers to use. But there again, I think in gaming, I think in many instances, the content developers also spearhead a lot of the new technology that is coming along.
Yeah, and I think it is a really interesting point. And I think maybe to extend what I was saying before, I think the degree of innovation that the infrastructure a content studio is trying to bring to the table really does matter. Where I think a lot of times my first point might have been referring to technology that's being a little bit more standardized and already being worked on a lot, like a wallet, for an example. It's not necessarily changing the game. It's not changing the content they're able to create. And they're kind of iterating on things that already exist, and their time just maybe is better spent elsewhere. However, there are definitely a lot of really interesting gameplay changing infrastructures that can be built by a content studio and make something that was impossible possible. I think that, to your point, Anton, is where it gets really interesting. And then it's not just a misuse of time. It's a requirement to build what you want to build. And I think that is a very powerful tool. And it's been interesting too to see the flip of what we were talking about, where we've actually seen a lot of infrastructure providers building games now and building out like a games team to show off the capabilities, because sometimes these infrastructure capabilities are so unique that no one's really ever seen it before. And so they're building out their own games teams to have the proof of concept and show off what they're actually able to do with it, which is an interesting flip of the content teams building infrastructure.
Man, there's like 4 things I want to dive into. One of the things that I wrote down was, it seems like there's old tooling, or like a difference in old tooling versus new tooling. And with which I mean tooling to solve a problem that we know exists, and then tooling that will be used to solve problems that we actually don't even know that exist or will exist. Because I had a conversation with one of the growth team members that are responsible for growth at Sky Mavis today. And he told me that one of the biggest, so he comes from the traditional hyper casual publishing space. He worked at Voodoo. And so he one of the insights that he got is that within Web3, there is nothing like nothing built around UA that as it exists within the Web2 gaming space, within specifically the mobile gaming space. And so, this is something that they're working on quite hard. And it is something that has gives them it's something that they're quite a lot ahead in or with, because one, they have
it's being built. It's being built. We've been also looking into this space, and also I think it's just a quick note there, because I think this is super interesting subject. And also when we look at mobile free to play, which is where arguably the relationship between the player and the developer is very different from Web3, where if in Web3 we're building in public, everything is super transparent, we always see where everything is going. But in mobile free to play, the closest you get to your users are on a spreadsheet. And sort of you see what their LTV is, what the CPI was, all of the attribution data, etc. You understand everything about those players from that perspective, and then you're able to get players at scale when you nail that model correctly. But that's maybe to the merit of Web2 gaming and free to play, is that it is what the level of data sophistication that these companies are dealing with at a high level, and how well they understand their users. And this is more or less completely absent still from the Web3 space, which maybe is in the beginning maybe a bit counterintuitive, given the amount of also open data that these companies can be dealing with. But now there's just a bunch of raw data out there. I don't know what the exact solution is going to be, but just starting from kind of the way of kind of building an ID or connecting one ID to multiple wallet accounts, etc., and trying to get smarter about what the spending of these wallets are that are, for example, in the Polygon ecosystem, and then building targeting, retargeting, different kinds of ways to attract players with airdrops, sending NFTs directly based on previous wallet activity. I think these are kind of this is the wet daydream of many founders right now, many game developers, and VCs included, and trying to sort of get to be the first ones to kind of figure that out at scale.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see where I think most teams that are going after the UA issue, I haven't heard a single one say that they're going to be able to fully rely on on-chain data. They always need the direct relationships with the studios or content producer to match up that data with the on-chain data to go one layer deeper and really provide the quality of insights that warrants a standalone business that helps you focus on airdropping to the highest value customers and knowing who these players are and what their capabilities and resources are. So it has been interesting where it goes almost like maybe full circle eventually to the Web2 gaming world, where you have to have the direct proprietary data insights from the studio, even though you might think on-chain data is this great open source of information. And it is, but on its own, I just really haven't seen anyone view that as sufficient. So I do wonder if the strategies will mirror what we've seen historically and just have an added layer of open Web3 data, but haven't really seen it quite yet.
Yeah, 100%. And I think most of the key problems will be solved off chain on the UI layer, on just how we interact with. Let's take an example of I'm a game developer. I develop Forex games, and I want to target wallets of other players that also play Forex games, because they're likely my best lookalike audience to go after. So I want to target them I want to get to them with targeted airdrops of assets in my game. If they come into my game and claim it, then sort of they get that asset, and that's the UA strategy. But right now, if I send an NFT to someone which is unwarranted, if it's OpenSea, it's going to go to the hidden tab, and how we're going to find that. How am I going to trust this random game that sends me an NFT? What if it's a phishing attempt? So, and I think the best possible way of doing any messaging is that you include a text message in the metadata that, hey, come and claim this at this URL, and then just trust us, and come play the game. So you're anyways going to have to trusting on the word of mouth layer there as well. But sort of imagine a wallet where you could read, the wallet interface could read from the metadata that sort of it would show you in your wallet a banner ad of that game and some key information about that game, how many players, what this game is about, and then there's a more UX friendly way of actually accepting that NFT and then jumping directly into the game, obviously given that it's running in the browser, or then directing you to the Epic Game Store or whichever storefront allows the distribution of your game. But yeah, still a lot to do on that front. But luckily we're seeing teams who are kind of thinking a couple of steps ahead from only focusing on the stuff that is now happening in the market and trying to optimize for, does this wallet interface look good? But just skip it, allow people to play this game for free, and then try to figure as much stuff in the background as possible.
So it sounds like, a lot of teams are trying to figure out this UA problem, which I would consider already an advanced problem when it comes to Web3, because there are some, more self-evident issues that are still not solved. Just like an on-ramp, right? Just before the recording, Anton tried to mint and he didn't have any SOL for him. And so he tried to use MoonPay, but his Finnish banks didn't like that. So he couldn't get any SOL to his wallet. And so, the on-ramp is an issue, wallets is an issue. And so
but you also witnessed when I was saved by the community.
You were saved by the community. It's beautiful. Web3, so wholesome, so positive. I love this.
I got an emergency drop of SOL in my Phantom, and I was able to.
That's amazing. Yeah. I wish I had friends like that or a community like that. Fogdao, please make it happen. Anyway, what I was going to ask is I wanted to have your thoughts on what's the time frame you consider some of these basic needs, basic toolings to be like solved problems, where you don't have to ask a game developer that's coming to you and with their pitch deck about like, how is your on-ramp going to, what's your on-ramp going to look like, and what's your wallet solution, and etc. Some of these basic principles, when do you expect those to be solved problems?
I feel like we'll see the first iteration of solving those problems within the next kind of 12 months. And again, emphasis on first iteration. I think we'll continue to see people build on top of wallets and these other core infrastructure layers that are necessary for blockchain gaming. But I've definitely started to see more consensus around what's the best on-ramp out there right now. What wallet should I be using? And while we're still seeing a lot of innovation in products that will be coming out over the next 1 or 2 years, I do feel like within the next year, we'll continue to see the release of V1 of that. So still, I think a long way to go to get it to where it ultimately needs to be. But I think the consensus will start to form on the optimal tools to build a game on top of sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be at the point when there's a decent game in the market. I think that's when the next gear will kick in with this infrastructure, because I still think that most of these teams are building, as I mentioned, they're kind of trying to solve problems that they don't even potentially know yet about. I think some of the early criticism I got from some of our content developers when I was asking for their opinion on certain infrastructure that I was seeing in the market is that they felt that yeah, there are some nice to haves, but these are still quite shallow in terms of, and then you were seeing a bunch of similar solutions being built in the market, but I think they're all suffering from the same challenge that I'm not sure if they know that they aren't potentially building for the right challenges yet. And there, I think it's the same answer I have for when people ask what chain do I think is the best one for gaming. It's whichever going to be the one that has the first hit game at scale, because then probably other developers also flock to that chain. Probably not for the right reasons, or who knows, but I think that's still the most important catalyst for everything in this space, is to have a game that sort of scales in a healthy manner, where you have players, in my opinion, that are paying for entertainment value. Obviously, you have all of this other stuff also in place to kind of enable this player-driven economy. But finding a game which is appealing for players who are willing to pay for entertainment value at scale, that's what I will be the most important catalyst also for then taking another look. Okay, when are we going to see this, as Philip mentioned, sort of this wave of infrastructure being ready, and then they'll again start looking at new challenges to build solutions for.
Yeah, and there will be a lot to sort out too. I think something that might go unnoticed in general is just how many people are going after the same problems right now, and how many wallets there are being built, how many different layer ones honestly are being built. There's a lot of people going after the same problems. And so I think Anton's point is a good one, that popularity will eventually start to really be important to adoption from other developers and builders. And who knows, I don't know if I buy into the first really, really good blockchain game being out in a year. I think that'll potentially depend on Web2 games pivoting into Web3 versus native Web3 games that are going to be ready. Because I do still feel like a lot of the top quality Web3 games that I've seen come through our office still have 2 to 3 years of development time left. And so the first Web3 native game might not be ready the first great Web3 game might not be ready in the next year, but you never know who's going to enter the mix and bring it forward.
You invested in the wrong game studios, bro. Yeah, I think it is an interesting discussion, and it seems like the network effects are like way stronger than anything we've ever seen, because of this concept of composability and interoperability, where if one chain starts gaining traction, they start gaining player liquidity, people start building, these tools can be reused, so people get drawn there. It almost, to me at least, it feels like the ETH ecosystem, the EVM ecosystem has kind of won already. If a very, very, very good game would come out on a blockchain like maybe Flow or Binance Smart Chain or whatever they're called now, do you guys think that then you would these chains would have potential all of a sudden?
Yeah, I think they would attract a certain amount of developer activity. Obviously, also depending on what the revenue numbers look like, and I think specifically for maybe developers, which would be most of the developers out there who either don't care about crypto yet, or are a bit undecided on what they would build on. Because I think there is kind of what's this bias called, survivorship bias, also in a way, that they see that, okay, because again, if it's something like Flow or something that's a bit more walled garden-ish type of a solution, it's also easier to solve for UX in a big way, and obviously, if there's a hit game and then you generate a lot of wallets in the background that might be hosted in the beginning, but when you teach the players retain for a longer time, you might want to present the option to take control of your own wallet, and that's how you potentially, I would view that as yet another conversion event where you see that player, that user is even more vested into your ecosystem. And it's a bit like, it's almost a bit like having an Apple ID as well, and then you're kind of vested to the App Store ecosystem in a way. So if, let's say, and this now specifically also for majority of users that aren't yet onboarded to crypto and Web3, but I think it can be a strong catalyst for that as well. And then they do own those users in a different way, even though the purists might not consider that being a kind of a true crypto solution.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think the quality of content will eventually determine success for a lot of these infrastructure layers. And I think that's why groups have relied so heavily on business development so far and basically buying content. And I think it's been something that Polygon has done incredibly well. And one of the reasons for their lead is they've invested in a ton of content creators. They have this massive stable of content that's bound to come out. And the more content you have, the more quality content you have, the higher likelihood of hitting that success. And so I feel like this BD effort from them has been to position themselves with the best content, with the highest likelihood of hitting, because eventually it's not going to just be about throwing investments all over the place and getting all these studios on. It's going to be having the beacon of content that attracts everyone there. It's like Fortnite to the Epic Games Store. Like that is the beacon of light that brought people in. And I think that will be key to the strategy. So I think today money is almost a proxy for game quality, and eventually that game quality will take over as the UA case for the infrastructure.
So this brings us very naturally to the reason why we're here together, the three of us. So a little bit of context. The three of us interviewed by a friend of ours, or mine at least, Avihai, who wanted to write a piece about how gaming VCs look at what's happening with the bear markets and what they're looking for. And so one of the quotes in the piece, which might be out once this goes out, we'll see about that, was around, who will be this beacon of light that draws in the players, and what's the main innovation that they will bring to games, where will the main innovation within their game come from? And so the question is a bit: do we expect this to be at the games level, or will we expect this to be at the tokenomics level? And so, Anton, you had a thought there, and I'd love to have your take, and then we can discuss it.
Yeah, no, I think this is I think we've been discussing this a few times as well with Nico previously or potentially, and I'd say if I have to choose between one of those, now again, I don't think it's that black and white, and now I'll have to double check what I answered in that report. But it was a very thoughtful answer anyhow. But I think it's definitely gameplay first in my world, at least. But this also depends on the audience. But I'll get to that. I'll get to that in a bit. But I think what initially draws someone to play a game is that kind of core loop, that's kind of core mechanic that you find interesting. Or it might be the idea of, playing with friends or something, but the reason you come back the same day or the next day is because you find that core gameplay being enjoyable. And I'm not yet sure how much of an impact things being on chain can have to that specific type of core gameplay. There is, though, a genre of games where that has an impact, and we'll hopefully also get into that a bit. But having that sort of core piece of basic actions that you do in the game is what you find interesting. It might be tab targeting based combat in an MMORPG. It might be an FPS game. It might be a top down shooter. It might be kind of the isometric hack and slash, pressing your mouse button in and running around slaying demons, whatever, or tapping, setting up your bases, attacking someone in Clash of Clans. That's the fun part, and that's kind of the reason. Those kind of tactile experiences that kind of light up all the brain fluids and get you going. Those are the reasons that you come back for those games daily, because I think that's kind of the spark for why you find a game interesting, but why you stay to play that game for years. Now that's a different matter, and that's obviously where the metagame design comes in, and sort of what are these kind of long-term goals and other sort of key things that keep you in place. It's a social network you build in the game. It might be the long-term goals that the game is setting to you, and there I think the on-chain design has a bigger part to play, and especially as we sort of we're gamers, everyone in this call. I think we understand what it means to feel that sort of there's economic value to, or sort of at least there's entertainment value, emotional value. So we also find that I think the economic value is kind of a proxy, or they are a proxy for there being economic value also within these assets, and that's something where I believe on-chain is better to emulate when we talk about larger masses of players who necessarily don't find real value in game elements being on chain. And just before my monologue gets a bit too long, I also want to go back to my previous point of where I think on chain game design does make sense. And I want to take us back a month and a half. We were having coffee with Nico in Tribeca, the only good black coffee I had in New York during that week. But there I had a dream about on-chain games. I told this to Nico, that I finally found out which audience, or there is, I believe that actually the on-chain games like Dark Forest and, for example, what Playmint is building, which is a shared investment that between Play and Bitcraft, with which Bitcraft led earlier, and I think those are the games that is the only one yet within crypto that have found product market fit, because or especially Dark Forest, because we're looking at a game where people don't really make any gains, but everything is happening on chain. You're simulating fog of war, for example, with privacy tech in crypto, and I think that it's sort of those kinds of games are mostly played by developers and really big like industry enthusiasts who enjoy. They truly get, I believe they truly get entertainment value of knowing that these things are happening on chain, and they're happy to play, they're happy to pay for it, and they're happy to do that without having to earn money from doing it. And that's why I find those super interesting. And I had my doubts of that specific subgenre of crypto games previously, but maybe, and I don't know if this insight or this thought holds water, but I believe it does to a certain extent. And I believe that's actually, we're looking there at the first audience within crypto games where we have found product market fit. I think crypto games is a spectrum, depending on how much on-chain elements you incorporate in your game development. But no, there's a super interesting subsegment at the moment, and seeing where that could grow by finding that core audience and seeing how far that core audience could extend. Mm-hmm. There was a bit of a monologue, but if I missed any of the points, and if you think I had any other good pointers in that report, Nico, then please point them out.
No, I mean, I think I totally agree on the gameplay versus tokenomics side. Gameplay definitely comes out on top there. And I think the fundamental bar that I use for that is that gameplay can exist without tokenomics, and tokenomics I don't believe can exist without gameplay. I think the last 20, 30 years have shown us that gameplay on its own can stand alone. If you asked people this a year ago, I think there would have been a more controversial conversation around tokenomics versus gameplay, where a year ago we were still exploring the origins of blockchain gaming and play to earn and what it meant to have financial rewards coming from playing a video game. And so I think there was more conversation around how a successful tokenomics model, and we saw this with the Axie example, could really drive an audience forward and be the core attraction. I also just think that over optimizing for tokenomics in a game will inevitably be a negative for studios, where as of today, you're just attracting the wrong audience. And I think that's the audience that will bounce around to whatever tokenomics model serves them best, not even is the best model. But gameplay aside, you're there for the earning mechanism. And so I think over optimizing towards gameplay enables you to have a more lengthened experience for players and really act as what we've historically seen from traditional games, which is a source of entertainment, a source of enjoyment, and the ability to create an IP that survives the test of time and brings in cash flow for years or decades. So I think it's this fundamental gameplay can survive without tokenomics, but I don't think tokenomics can drive a game forward meaningfully if it doesn't have an engaging core loop that brings players back for the right reasons.
So if I would try to summarize what I hear you guys say, it would be that a successful game will have a fun, non-crypto related core gameplay loop, and there's a sort of meta economic layer around that, which just deepens the game and makes it more fun to replay over the long term. Would that be fair?
I think from a tokenomics perspective, yes, but I do think there is an angle as well. And we've talked about this in the FogDAO Discord about how NFTs, so like set the traditional view of like tokenomics aside, how you can leverage blockchain and NFTs to impact your core gameplay loop. Kind of like that choose your own adventure example, where the way that you play the game might shape the way that the future core loop interacts with you. And so there's a lot of cool things you can do there. But I think purely from a tokenomics perspective, I would agree with what you're saying.
Good.
Yeah, I think again, there's it's not black and white in a sense that it's one piece of this and it's one piece of that, but it's a result of constant iteration. It might be that something on chain will affect the core loop. Now I don't know what that's going to be, but I think you just have to ask, who is my audience? Who am I building this for? And do they care? Do they find this fun? And then the end result is a mix of something like that. And here again, maybe a thought that I sometimes get criticized for, but I do think that there is a lot to learn from free to play when also building these games, because these are also games that ran there. these are games that have been also, or especially if we look at games that have had deep economies before. But instead of the developer being the central bank, now it's an open market more in a way. So bringing more challenges, but potentially also much deeper retention hooks also in a way, because I think players ultimately feel more vested in these games and in these economies when you free it up to other players. But I think some of the basic rules still stand. There is a loop. There is a behavioral loop when you log into the game and what you want to do there. That gets you interested, because again, we're living in the attention economy. Get pop-ups left and right, what we should do, what we should try. I mean, like e-commerce sites are competing for the same screen time as any mobile game or any PC game or Netflix for that matter. So it has to be engaging what you do when you come in, and relatively effortless, or I mean, not effortless, but effortless enough. You have to find the flow state of something being fun in that game. But that thing is only going to be fun, couple of days. And there needs to be kind of long-term stuff, the meta game, which also exists in a lot of the kind of very economy-driven free-to-play games, and the social aspect. But these are all building on top of that super fun experience that you have when you play the game and sort of come into the game for the first couple of times. And that's and then the other part is what makes you stay for those for many years. Not to say that game free to play is. I'm not saying that they're vis-a-vis with crypto games. Obviously, it's going to be. We've already seen that with teams that come from free to play and kind of are struggling to kind of not reinvent the wheel, but sort of think outside of the the kind of boundaries of free to play, and just trying forgetting those old rules and really thinking about something new. But there is a lot to. I think there's always a lot to learn from previous paradigms, and then I think that's maybe my main point with thinking that, or I would say, the difference between mobile free to play games and single player role playing games on console is bigger than what I believe a big category of Web3 games and free to play games will look like. Let's put it that way, because you're still at the heart, you're still dealing with sort of a deep game economy in both of these instances. And I do think they speak to the same player base, especially when we start looking at growing outside of small sort of core player base, and also because I promise I'll shut up in a second, but also from the perspective of what people are generally, what we look at the Western markets, what players are generally willing to spend on. If we look at that kind of archetypal gamer, which I believe all of us were at some point, the sweaty 14-year-old playing World of Warcraft, League of Legends, CSGO, Hearthstone, etc. We hate pay to win. Like, it runs deep in our hearts. We hate pay to win, and we're not afraid of being vocal about it. So we're not going to pay for something that affects gameplay. But if you look at gaming revenue-wise, where that spending is happening, it's happening in the pay to win mobile games, where you're paying for progress, you're paying for time skips because you don't have time to play, so you're substituting with paying, and there's a big audience for it. So revenue-wise, it's very, very, very important for gaming and also for games businesses. And because of that behavior exists in Western markets within those genres, that's why I find those genres super compelling also for games that have on-chain elements, as I believe that those players can become even more vested and spend even more time and their resources in playing these games and get even more enjoyment out of it now that we unlock the next level for them to be actually part of the game economies they have been playing for years.
Interesting. And, you shared that you were not afraid to put some controversial thoughts out there. Sorry. So I'll do the same. So we've had discussion. Phil probably already knows what I'm going to say, right? But I think, so what I've seen over the past year is that the fact that you build an open economy around games has a risk of negatively impacting that core gameplay loop that's fun. And I think that in the short term is what's going to make most of the iterations around this fail. I do believe that in the long term, the biggest game ever, I think, will happen within the next decade, and it will be a massive MMO where that's completely open. It's going to be incredibly well designed, and it's going to be designed around the fact that the economy is open. But before that exists, and I also think we'll see a lot of failures along the way, because I think designing a good game with a meta game that has an open economy aspect is way harder than doing the same with a closed economy. And so we're going to see a lot of failures. But what I'm personally then looking for is, things like Playmint. We just discussed Playmint. It's a company, they're building a fully on-chain game. It's looking amazing, by the way. We'll get, some of the founders on pretty soon here to discuss more in depth what they're doing. But I'm actually looking for games where blockchain actually impacts the core gameplay experience. And I think, those in the short term will do better, because most games that have try to access this open economy, this meta layer, will be over financialized and and that will impact the core gameplay loop.
No, it's been interesting over the last, call it 12 to 15 months, where we went through this really big but really fast cycle where blockchain gaming hype really started with play to earn. Once play to earn came up, we started seeing more people flock to fiat on ramps, and then we started seeing people flock to general blockchain education. Eventually, we got towards a big wave of gameplay first pitches, and I'm sure you guys have seen this as well. And it's been interesting how the industry kind of catches up to itself, where month by month, I was seeing the same trends come from a bunch of different founders, where everyone was moving in the same direction. And it kind of went from that start where it was play to earn, the financialization and earning capabilities from games, to the play first mentality. And I think once we hit gameplay first, that's when we really started to see Nico's point of, we need to see the blockchain functionality enhance the core game loop, because if not, like, who cares, right? I think that's what a lot of traditional gamers say is, it doesn't do anything. Like, why does this matter? And I think that's where blockchain gaming does have an interesting opportunity to stand out, where it's not just core game loop with NFTs as cosmetics. There are these interesting ways to reward creators, impact the core loop of the experience, and all these other things that I think will be really critical to getting buy-in from people that are currently saying, who cares? And for them to try it out because there's something truly novel and unique about the upcoming experiences that we're going to start seeing.
And there, I just want to quickly repeat my previous point that again, I do believe this spectrum of how much on-chain elements you include in your game, and also a reason why we're investors in Playmint, and also we want to hit the best teams tackling each part of this segment. I just believe these audiences are different. I believe there is an audience for all of these spectrums, and those are potentially very high value audiences. And we want to be targeting studios building for all of these parts and kind of getting exposure to the whole kind of plethora of different games that are going to be out there. But when I think about, what could be interesting for that more casual Web2 mobile gamer, but that still spends a lot of money on games, because revenue-wise, that's a very interesting audience today in gaming. And I'm trying to figure out how to get, or what's the way to get them into the space. In a few years' time, they might hopefully sort of drift more towards those games where there is innovation on a core gameplay level, and kind of including stuff on chain. But currently, they still bring some amount of complexity, and arguably, these players that I'm talking about are necessarily not going to be try out those games. But I think, looking at this as a timeline, I think the next step is really unlocking that new premium in LTV by inducing the idea to players that they actually own the things in the game. And I think that will unlock a premium on spending that we haven't seen in more mass market games previously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember one interesting comment on that I'm aligned with. I think I saw a tweet like a year ago, and it was talking about how the fact that a player shouldn't want to spend $500,000+ on a game is a flaw in game design. And I think that's something where spending capabilities and willingness to spend is going to increase through ownership, because it's not a sunk cost once you purchase something. It is a true asset. And so while 500K, granted, is a massive number, I think the sentiment behind it does make sense and aligns with Anton's comment about LTVs, where true ownership does matter, because it's not a consumption cost. It truly is an asset that I own. And if I move to something else, I can swap it for something that is higher value to me. So it'll be interesting to see how that impacts game monetization. But I do think it does tune things to enable whales to become even bigger whales when they enter this world.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, and all of these, even speculation plays its part here in terms of what are the different components that affect someone's spending behavior in these games. I hope it's going to be a much smaller part in the future than it is right now, but I think it will always be present in some way. But as long as the entertainment value trumps that sort of speculation value, then I think we're headed to the right direction. Because again, I think a fun example, if we go into confession mode here, just real quickly before Nico needs to jump. But World of Warcraft's game I've spent by far the most money on, like by far. Been subscribed for 14 years. I bought trading card game items from third-party sites. I bought WoW Gold. I bought Power Leveling. I bought the whole thing. I've spent so much money on that game. And the game I've spent second most money on by far is Crypto Raiders, because I spent like just a bunch of money off the bat on those characters when I started playing. Like, my League of Legends skins don't come near that level of spending. But there was the powerful primitive of obviously it was new and cool and things, but which still that showed that powerful primitive owning that stuff really, and being able to, if I want to get rid of them, then I can get rid of them, etc. But again, it's very interesting.
Yeah, sorry, I'm going to have to
example of
jump. It feels like we could probably keep this discussion going for another hour. I would love also to have a discussion once about what giving players resellability means for developer revenues or publisher revenues, because no one seems to talk about that. And that is something that, I don't know, we need to discuss what it means. Anyway, this was amazing.
Yeah, so we're going to do this, we're going to make this a trilogy. We're going to call this A New Hope. The second one is Anton Strikes Back, and then it's Return of the Fog in the last episode.
Love that. Good. Anton, Philip, thanks so much for joining. Listener, thank you for listening too, if you made it here. Really appreciate it. If you liked what you heard, feel free to let us know. You can join the Discord. You can also subscribe to the Naavik newsletter. And if you want to have some really, really deep insights, way deeper than what we just discussed, you can also subscribe to Naavik Pro with the code Metacast there. All right, guys, thanks for this. It was a good episode. I really enjoyed this. Yeah, that's it. And look forward to speaking to you in the next one. Cheers.